Today's lesson is called 40 Days of Letting Go. Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and it marks the beginning of the Christian Lenten season. And as we know, Unity's early theological influence was Christianity, primarily because Unity co-founder Myrtle Fillmore was a devout Methodist. And plus, on top of that, Christianity was just the predominant religion in America at the time, and it still is. But as I've talked about before, there's been an 80-year decline in church attendance, so we're kind of fading a little bit, and we've talked about that in the past. However, to all the different influences that were around at that time period, such as the scientific revolution, transcendentalism, and the varied interests of Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, it didn't take long for Unity to expand into much more than that, to include a much bigger picture. The result was Unity's view of the Christian model changed to what we believe is a more encompassing, broader perspective. But this different view of seeing the Christian model is exemplified very well in the Lenten season, and that's the topic of today. It is very different from how tradition interprets it, but it's consistent with how we see and interpret Christian concepts. Every year, Unity puts out a booklet. This year, it's called 40 Days of Letting Go. We've ordered some copies. On your way out, please take a copy with you. They are free. And the recurring theme this year in the book is to get you to do a daily practice of letting go of something in your life that you really don't need anymore. And examples like we release and let go of limitations. We release and let go of negative thinking. We release and let go of resentments. And it goes on, each for 40 days. And the hope is that it will get you into a daily practice to do these things, not just during Lent, but all year long. Because the use of these spiritual practices is key in your spiritual unfolding. That is why every Sunday we introduce what we just did, a spiritual practice that we call. This is to help you to develop these positive routines, habits, to help you continue, let's say, in your spiritual unfolding. A few years ago, the booklet that Unity put out was called Fasting and Feasting. And I grew up a Catholic, and when I came across that view of Lent, fasting and feasting, it was like nothing I had ever really seen or heard before. And I went like, what do you mean feasting? During Lent? Really? What does that even mean? It was completely contrary to anything I had ever really heard of. And today I want to share with you a little bit of that, because I used to think that Lent was about giving up something, about suffering in a certain way, as a way to prepare us for the Passion Week that's coming up in 6 weeks or whatever it is. And by the way, do you know why I call it Passion Week? Well, the first time Passion Week, anybody know? It's because they don't use the word passion like we use the word passion. Like I'm passionate for music, or I'm passionate for this or that, the other. That's not the definition originally of the word. It comes from the Latin, and it means to suffer. That's why it's Passion Week. Anyway, I found this view of fasting and feasting refreshing and just inspiring, and I still do, and I want to share with you some of that today. So, if that doesn't define, fasting and feasting, if that does not define our tagline, a positive path for spiritual living, I don't know what does. So before I get into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the tradition so that you are familiar with where does the whole idea of Lent come from. As you know, I'm a very, very curious person, and I like to ask questions, and I like to know, because we need to know where we get these ideas so we'll know why we have these ideas. Traditionally, religions have developed this way. It's called the 4 M's. The first one, it goes like this. The first one is the man. And then there is a message. And then there is a movement. And then there is a monument to the man. Now, what is the point here? That in our limited understanding, we end up mistaking the man for the message. The message becomes about the man instead of about the idea. And that's the classic Zen finger pointing at the moon. And in Unity, we believe this is exactly what happened with Jesus. He was not saying, follow me, the man. He was saying, follow me, the message that I have, because it applies to all man. And I say that all the time. If it's about one person, then it's only about that one person. But if it is about an idea, then it is about everybody, you and me and everyone. Thus, in Unity, we see Jesus as the great example, not the great exception. One of the great courses that I took is called How Jesus Became God. And the great courses, if you're not familiar, are put together by this company that hires the best professors in the whole country. I mean, PhD guys who teach religion, Christianity in Harvard or Yale or things like this. And so you're sitting there in a top-notch Christian class. And so I want to do this lesson at the end of the Lent season so we can get an idea how that came about. So let's go back to the beginning of the Lent season. First of all, I want you to understand that Lent is not in the Bible. Not at all. And it's something that the church made up. Yep, good old man-made rules. That's what that is. From the forward section of the book, Keep a True Lent, written by Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, comes this. He says, it is commonly believed that the Lenten period has to do with the 40 days preceding the resurrection. This is an erroneous idea. Lent is a church institution, and there is no authorization for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus himself set a precedent for it. Each observed a 40-day period of prayer and fasting as a preparation for spiritual work. Moses received the 10 Commandments after his conclusion of a fast. Elijah talked with God at the conclusion of his period of prayer and fasting. And Jesus began his ministry after the close of the 40 days in the wilderness. When I researched how the practice of Lent began, I found this. Ash Wednesday is a practice which uses the symbolism of putting ashes on our foreheads as a reminder of our unworthiness, sinfulness, and need for redemption. A reminder of our unworthiness, sinfulness, and need for redemption. Do we really need a reminder of that? In the Old Testament times, it says, putting ashes on the forehead, fasting, and wearing sackcloth were signs of true repentance. In 1099, Pope Urban II is responsible for calling the first day of Lent Ash Wednesday. So this is 1,100 years after Jesus. He imposed ritual for only those who committed grave sins. They were asked to do public penance until they reconciled through confessions and penitence to the church. Now listen to this. The practice was initiated to quarantine sinners from the rest of the community. By the way, the word quarantine has a Latin root from where we get 40. In Spanish, if you know Spanish, it's cuarenta. Quarantine, cuarenta, 40. And so that's the 40 days. I also looked up the definition of penance. And it says, listen to this, voluntary self-punishment inflicted as an outward expression of repentance for having done wrong. Voluntary self-punishment. You got to love that. My curiosity kicked in, and I said, well, what is the definition of penance? Where does that come from? And I looked it up. And interestingly, there is a Spanish word which shares the same root. I don't know if all cultures use it, but we do here in South Texas, and the word is penitencia. Literally, it means punishment. But in Spanish, we refer to it as a prison. Yeah. So that's the word penance comes from. So in summary, it works like this. We create self-imposed punishments, prisons, because of our belief in unworthiness. That's what we do. Any wonder that why we're where we are? Really? Self-imposed stuff. And you know, the Eagles have a song, Already Gone, and in there it says, so we live our whole lives in chains and don't realize that we have the key. You know, and when I think about that, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free, it's that you have the key. You have the key, and nobody can open it except through you. Emerson wrote, God enters into every man, this is 1800 language, God enters into every man through a private door. I said, thank you, Emerson. So I got to thinking, you know, surely there must be a better way to look at this Lent business. And so along comes Unity into my life and offers me a totally different way of looking at it. I said, this actually makes sense. This is strange. Essentially, it is, broadly speaking, it is about the many crucifixions and resurrections that we have during our journey, during our human experiences. And a lot of them are small. You know, maybe you broke your arm, or that's not too small, but maybe smaller. Maybe you scratched yourself or whatever. And then you heal yourself. And so that's a kind of a crucifixion and a resurrection. There's some bigger ones that if you go through a divorce, for example, that's a big crucifixion. But then you find somebody else that maybe makes you even happier, and that's a resurrection. So it happens all the time. And the crucifixion and resurrection of this time of the season has to do with a really big picture. And that is our crucifixion of our limitations and of our not knowing who we truly are, and the resurrection that comes with it from that newfound knowledge. So let's take a look at this idea of fasting and feasting from a whole new way. Because Lent is a church, even though it is a church institution, it says it embodies the exalted idea of cleansing and disciplining both the mind and body towards the end of making us more receptive to divine ideas. So you're getting out the clutter so that you can bring in this resurrected idea of our divinity, basically. That's the concept behind Lent. So let's take a look at that kind of a version of it. Now that we have a refreshed mind about that. I used to go in there, I've said before about God. We'll do the same thing with Lent. Go to your subconscious mind, look at your files, and find Lent, and then right-click it and delete it. There you go. So let's start all over. Unity is as I said, unity is a positive path for spiritual living. So let's find a way to look at this Lent season from a positive and spiritual way. In doing so, I found some interesting information. It says this: there are two ways to move through the Lenten season: fasting and feasting. Both are legitimate expressions of spiritual growth. As a matter of fact, from a spiritual perspective, both are necessary. Spiritually speaking, there is only one kind of fasting, and that is abstaining from error thoughts, choices, and actions that dampen the awareness of our oneness with Spirit. The dieting that we advocate during Lent is to diet from doubts, diet from fear, abstain from believing we are unworthy, and eliminating the thinking that we are sinful by nature. Fillmore says, when we withdraw our attention, interest, and support from the false and the unworthy, this is true fasting. That's what fasting really is from a spiritual perspective. So we encourage you to fast from the belief that you just come here to learn lessons. Sometimes we learn lessons, and sometimes it can be hard. But in Unity, we teach they are effects, not causes. And the cause is from our previous erroneous thoughts that we must change, that we free ourselves from, feast in that, so that we can feast in that oneness with Spirit. So we need to fast from the idea that life has to have suffering. We really do. Jesus said, he didn't say, I come that you might have more suffering and more abundance in your suffering. He said, I came that you might have more life and more abundance in your life. So let's get off. We need to get off this dead-end road and fast from those old ideas. Fast from the thought that we're not in alignment with spirit, because we are. We just need to get out of the way. That's all we need to do. Get out of the way. That divinity within you wants to express itself, but our minds get in the way. Get out of the way. So next time you have to wait a little longer at the grocery store in line, why don't you fast from becoming impatient? And next time things don't go exactly the way you want them to go, maybe fast from becoming upset. The next time you don't agree with someone, fast from being judgmental. Next time you have a feeling of not being worthy, fast from that feeling of unworthiness. I want to take a few moments today to just contemplate today's message. It's a message about change. It's a message about fasting from our old views and feasting in our newfound glory. When I first wrote this lesson, I was pleasantly surprised to find something that kind of gave me a hint that maybe the global awareness is really changing. Because that year, these are the words of Pope Francis. He wrote this, very unity-like. He said, "Do you want to fast this year? Fast from hurting words and say kind words. Fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. Fast from anger and be filled with hope. Fast from worry and have trust in God. Fast from complaints and contemplate simplicity. Fast from pressures and be prayerful. Fast from bitterness and fill your heart with joy. Fast from selfishness and be compassionate to others. Fast from grudges and be reconciled. Fast from words and be silent so that you can listen." These are the words of Pope Francis. So next time you think or do or anything that comes out of you that you know clearly is not from God, fast from that feeling and feast in the glory and the bounty that is Spirit. Bendiciones.